You set me up today.
Yeah, today was a session for pressure on her modality view. And now we are going to hear about problems and possibilities, a pragmatic view on scientific understanding. So this is the last talk, and we are very honored by you closing the workshop. That's it. The floor is yours. I'm going to let you know when you have spoken for 50 minutes.
50? Oh, I don't think I'll talk for 50.
Oh,
I think I've got 45.
So if you reach the 50 points,
My God. Yeah, if I reach 50 points, let's close it up, bring the booze, and stop it. Sorry. Okay. It is 5 o'clock, and you guys are still here. So I just want to recognize that. And so thank you for being here. Thank you for thank you to Miguel and Maria who organized this workshop. It's been very inspiring to hear about what everybody's up to. It's always fun to come to those things, and I'm really grateful to be invited to come here. Yeah, thank you for being here. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the problems and possibilities view of understanding, which is modal understanding, but bigger. So it includes everything that Tavio and Bruno and other people have talked about, but it's actually much more comprehensive. This is a project that I started way too far long ago, and it should be finished. It should have been finished long ago. It hasn't been the case. Hopefully this is the last stretch, the home run, and we're not going to change the view anymore, and it's going to happen. I say we because it has become, on the way, a collaborative project with Armand Jouel, and he's not here, but he's, just a regular bold philosopher, and we work on it together, so I want to recognize that. So the plan for the talk is pretty straightforward. I'm going to motivate the view, present the view, and apply the view. I'm not going to be very creative here about how I go about these things. So let's start motivating why I think that we need that view of understanding, right? And some of what I'm going to say is something that you've heard already about the common view of understanding, how it doesn't do everything that a view of understanding should be doing, and what that means for the kind of goal I have or we have in that view. So the common view typically reduces understanding to understanding why, or explanatory understanding. So here's an example. This is Angela Lewis. She is an ecologist at the University of Montana. And she works on virus transmission. This is hantavirus. It looks like a crochet thing, right? It's kind of a cute crochet thing. It's actually a virus that kills, if you get it, you have 35% chances of dying. So it's not great crochet thing. So she works on hantavirus, actually on the version of hantavirus in deer mice. So typically humans get hantavirus from deer mice poop, roughly. And that's a deer mice. They're very cute, but kind of dreadful. for that reason. So that's what she does. She looks at the dynamics of infection in deer mice population. And so zoonotic disease transmission is kind of important to know when an outbreak of hantavirus is going to come up. If you want to, rent a cabin in the middle of the woods in Montana, you better know whether the mice out there around that cabin have the virus or not. If they do, you might want to bleach the entire cabin before you start your vacation, which might not be your ideal version of a weekend in a cabin. Okay, so one of her projects in her lab that resulted in the 2018 paper was to look at the relationship between diversity and transmission. So what do I mean by that? Imagine that you have this population of those little rodents, right, the deer mice. And the question is whether if there are other rodents around, like more diverse population among other species of rodents, roughly at the same level of population, is it the case that we have less or more transmission of the disease, more infections or less infection? What was interesting at the time is that there were field studies, right, which is one way in which you can do ecology. There were field studies, but those field studies would give conflicting data. So some field studies seemed to suggest that there was a dilution effect. So more species of rodents around, less transmission. Maybe the deer mice don't find each other with the kangaroo mice. And there was other field studies that suggested there was an amplification effect. So it seemed that the disease was more prevalent in deer mice population, which were mixed with other little mammals. So Lewis and her colleagues and her team looked at that. And Lewis is not doing field studies. She does theoretical models. She's a modeler, which is a rare species among ecologists, but they do exist, and I kind of like them. So she did that study, a bunch of theoretical models. And what she found out, thanks to her theoretical models, is that there were two possible mechanisms underlying, two possible mechanisms between diversity and transmission. One which had an amplification effect, and the other one a dilution effect. And so depending on which mechanism was stronger in the particular population you were looking at, then the net result would be either dilution or amplification. Okay, so that example, you can read that study and that work, so no, that's theoretical work, as a perfect, beautiful example of understanding wine, maybe. So let's play the game, right? So she's unveiling underlying mechanisms, causal relations. It's mathematically consistent. She uses modified version of the logistic growth equation, the discrete kind, so whatever, it doesn't matter. And it's relatively empirically adequate. She uses large data from Montana and Wyoming and other Western states, and so it's reasonably empirically adequate, mathematically consistent. And we gain, thanks to this unveiling of underlying mechanisms or causal relations or explanation, whatever you want to say, if you grasp those causal relations, then you gain understanding, which is a cognitive achievement, and gives you some appropriate inferential power to maybe study more stuff, look for other mechanisms, or look for specifics in particular population. Okay, so that's the story. We have a very simple case of understanding here in terms of understanding why, in terms of grasping causal relations. That sounds great, and I'm not denying that it exists. I think it does exist in the sciences. My problem is that that's not the whole story, right? So it misses by reducing understanding, and not everybody who is studying understanding why reduces it to understanding why, right? Some people say, I'm just giving an analysis of understanding why. Fine. But the problem for me in that case is that you're still missing a large portion of scientific practice. Okay, so some examples, and in the book we have more like 6, but I had room for 4. So some examples of other kinds of understanding. The first thing I want to say is the top 2 is that scientific understanding can be extremely practical and extremely theoretical. Extremely practical, one of the favorite current examples is Ørsted manipulation of electromagnetism and the discovery or the manifestation of electromagnetic effects. Oscar Westerblad in his dissertation, makes a great description of what's going on there. It is extremely practical. There is no theory behind it. He's just manipulating wire and trying to create, a magnetic field with his wires. And he's trying a bunch of things to show that it exists. Many people had tried to show that electromagnetism was a thing, but they had failed, and he is the one who finds the way to manipulate stuff in order to make it happen. So here it doesn't seem like it's about explanation at all. It's just about manifestation, right? The question is, how can I make those phenomena manifest? So that's one side. And on the other, opposite side, there's those crazy people doing like very, very, very theoretical stuff, right? So here, the example we like is information theoretic reaxomization of quantum theory. Which is like, I feel like I just swore, that, without the cussing, basically is looking into the fundamental structure, theoretical structure of quantum theory, looking at really what makes quantum correlations quantum in comparison to classical, in comparison to super quantum correlations that I was just mentioning. And there's an entire industry in the sciences to look at those extremely theoretical theoretical research. And again, here the question doesn't seem to be an explanatory question. It is a question that targets more theory than the phenomena, and it's about what makes quantum quantum. And then, in addition to this, there's a bunch of other things that scientists do that doesn't seem to fit the mold of explanatory understanding or understanding why. And one example is robustness analysis. There is a lot of discussion about robustness. What is clear is that it's actually very controversial whether robustness is a sign of confirmation. Just because models agree doesn't mean that it's true in the world. It could be just a feature of that set of models. It's like groupthink, right? Just because you all agree in the room doesn't mean you're right. You could be all wrong, but together. So it's really unclear whether robustness is something you understand about the models, the set of models themselves, or about the world. In which case, then robustness is what? It has also a different targets, not the phenomena. Maybe it is a structure in the theoretical structure, right, among various models. But it's not clear, again, that here it's about explanation or causal relations. It seems like the target is not the phenomena, the target is something different. So we're missing out, again, a way to fully account for scientific practice. And even Angie's work, right? So when I push Angie on her models, they're just not as bad as the Lotka-Volterra, but they're still very much idealized, right? So she does have, unlike the very simple models in ecology, in population ecology, she has a term for immigration, right? So for example, for the Lotka-Volterra, another equation, one thing is not there, immigration and emigration is not there. But animals move, it turns out. They don't stick around all the time. So she has a term for that. It's a constant term. Poof! Here's a term for immigration, right? The carrying capacity is not constant, which is an improvement. It just includes like some kind of stochastic element in this roof. But again, it's like also still very much idealized. And there are other idealizations in the very fabric of differential or difference equations that are not necessarily corresponding to what we know of the world, in particular the ecological world, which is largely nonlinear, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so you could say, some people, possibly including me, would say that because of this idealization, it's really hard to make sense of how they give actual explanation, but instead they probably do something else, like exploring the possible, but I'm going ahead of myself. Okay, so even Lewis' work I don't think is that great of an example, it turns out, for the common view of understanding. I think we're still missing on the kind of stuff she does and the richness of what she does. Okay, so my goal is to give a more comprehensive account of scientific understanding, one that unifies scientific practice in its great, variety. And when you want to expand understanding, you're going to need some multiple targets of understanding. It's not only the phenomena. It could be the theory. It could be something else. It's multiple questions that you ask about the target beyond the kind of explanatory or causal mechanism questions. And it's also multiple activities, right? So it's not only about representation. It's also generating theories. It's also generating data. It's also manipulating those like bioengineering systems. Or protein folding is also another field where they do really weird stuff. So there are multiple things like that scientists do. Gather data, right? That's a thing too. So how does that provide understanding? It doesn't provide you an explanation. So I would like to have a view of understanding that is capable of just encompassing all of those various targets, activities, and goals in the sciences. That's pretty ambitious. I'm doing a theory of everything. I get it. But I did it. Okay, sorry. Hopefully, you won't, think I'm totally insane by the end of this talk. Okay, so that's the problems and possibility view of understanding. It comes with problems, it comes with possibilities, and then it comes with problems and possibilities together. Again, I'm not being very creative about the structure of the talk. All right, so why do I focus on problems? Well, Tanya gave us the answer in her talk at the end. But I'm going to say a little bit more. Okay, so I do dig my heel on understanding being a success thing, but not necessarily know-how. I'm not touching know-how. Don't want to touch those epistemologists. I'm a philosopher of science. Okay, so the trick with understanding is that it is a success term. I dig my heels on this, but it is a multi-gradable success term. And by multi-gradable, I mean that it comes in degrees, that's uncontroversial, according to multiple dimensions. I think that's relatively uncontroversial as well. And because it comes in degrees along multiple dimensions, it is extremely difficult to think that could be one general context-independent criterion that would decide on the success or there you go, understanding. Across all the scientific practices and all the scientific activities and targets. So the first thing I'm thinking is that, well, success is defined relative to a problem. So you've been in a faculty meeting or in a meeting, right? And someone is offering to pay some money to bring in a new software or a new something. And what is my first question? What is the problem we're trying to solve, right? And we're going to assess the success of whatever it is that we're trying to do, that we're doing, depending on the problem, not in an ideal, in an abstract world, like, oh, this is successful. No, it's like if regular advising helps with retention, fine. The goal is retention, and let's have this software that sends automated emails to students telling them, hey, it's time for you to make an appointment with your advisor. Of course, that's how the email talks. That's the voice. I'm pretty convinced that's what it is. Okay, so we typically assess success depending on the specific problem. And I do think that it's really crucial to cast understanding as relative to a particular problem. So as I mentioned before, Orsted is trying to figure out how to manifest electromagnetic effects. Angie is trying to look into the mechanisms between underlying disease transmission. And Chris Fuchs, I didn't introduce him, but he's one of those information theoretic guys. And he's been working on deciphering what makes quantum correlation so special. Okay, so they all have specific problems, and the specific success or understanding they progenerate through their practices is going to be assessed depending on the particular problem they're trying to solve. How do we define problems? This is a philosophy talk. So we need to define problems. I actually defer to Wendy Parker. This is really nice because there is an established definition of problems, and I think it's actually good. So Wendy Parker explains that problems can be defined as a set of purposes to be achieved within constraints. So you have goals, but you also have constraints. Those constraints can be very theoretical, they can be very practical, right? There is the tyranny of availability in the sciences. What kind of software can you afford? How much memory do you have? How much computing power do you have? So the constraints can be very mundane, like your budget and the number of staff members you have. They can be more theoretical, that you want to do something within a particular mathematical formalism, for example. I don't care. But problems come with constraints. And you cannot solve a problem if you don't solve the problem within the constraints that define the problem. So you have goals and you have constraints. In our view, different problems are going to individuate different kinds of understanding. So think about those adorable deer mice, right? There are all kinds of questions you can ask about the deer mice, besides, how they are deadly. You can look at whether they are a keystone species, like groundhogs are, in their ecological system. Or you could look at their genetic makeup and evolutionary history. Or, in fact, you could look at what kind of genetic makeup makes it more likely to have transmission. And she doesn't look at genetics at all. Like, all those individuals have the same genetic makeup, and transmission doesn't depend on genetics, which is another idealization, which is absurd, right? Okay, so you could ask all kinds, and whether you come from, genetics or evolutionary biology or population ecology, you're going to yield different kinds of understanding about the deer mice because you're trying to solve different kinds of problems. Okay, and then our main claim is that by focusing on the world is becoming angry at me. So I did something wrong. So one of our main claims is then that problem solving and how much you solve of the problem is going to serve that role of being a general criteria across the board. Okay, so how do we get to possibilities? We get to possibilities simply because most scientific problems are complex problems, and most complex problems admit of multiple possible solutions and not one perfect solution. So you will have, once you have a problem, you have not only different ways to approach the problem, right? So remember about transmission, we had field studies versus theoretical models. Within theoretical models, there's different theoretical models you could look at. So in a 2015 article, Angie had an age structure for her population. So depending on whether you were juvenile, premature, or mature mice, you would have that into the model. And then she ditched it in 2008. She was like, no, we don't need to do that. And then we're going to neglect the juvenile population anyway because they don't get sick, so we don't care about them. But anyway, so there are various possible options, right, that you can choose from when you go about studying a system. So various possible ways to approach the problem. And then once you have a particular way to approach the problem, even there, you can investigate the possibilities, possible solutions, right? So one possible solution for Dirac's equation is that, I forget the three things, but there were three things. One of them being the positron. Some kind of, I forget. See, oh my God, this is really disturbing. I wish I didn't forget. But anyway, there were three. The last one is the positron, and that's the one we like. But there were different possibilities, so investigation of possibilities. Angie is looking into possibilities, right? So there is this mechanism that produces a dilution effect. There's this mechanism that produces an amplification effect. And then she said at the end of the article, there might be other mechanisms, especially the ones that, why is that diluting the population would actually amplify the transmission? Well, maybe the deer mice are like scared of all those kangaroo mice, and they all scuttle together in one corner, and then, the infection goes like crazy, right? So we don't know, and she says in her paper, we need to investigate more, right? So there are more possibilities to be discovered. So again, there are at least two ways in which possibilities come in, the way to approach the problem, and then the various possible problem solutions within one approach. Okay, so we have problems. And then we have possible ways to approach a problem and possible problem solutions, and then brings us to problems and possibilities. So when you think about scientific understanding in our view, you think first we need to be precise. And it's important to define your target. What is it that you're trying to understand? And then you define your problem. What is it that you're trying to solve regarding, what problem are you trying to solve regarding the problem? Then you look at the various activities that you could, various possible activities that you can engage in order to solve the problem. So that could be a field study, that could be just stay in your lab and do math. And then that is understanding is always defined relative to the target, the activity, and the problem. Okay. And now, after this, you consider the various ways in which you can engage in these possibilities, and then the various possible problem solutions. And that's the beginning. Okay. We take a breath here. I take a drink. And we move to the even more complicated stuff. Okay. There will be wolves at the end. I'm just like advertising this. So hang on, we're going to talk about wolves. Okay, so the big mechanism, the big form. So I'm a philosopher of science. I'm an analytic philosopher of science, so I have to have like some kind of machinery, right? Okay, so I never know whether it would be better to give you the machinery first and then the example. Hank Green actually told me that it was always the wrong thing to do, that you should always draw the intuition and then bring the technical terms. Sorry, Hank. Here it is. So in our view, one has some understanding of a target for a certain problem and certain activity, if one of two things or both. Either you engage in that activity, or you reflect on that activity. More precisely, one has an exercise and enduring competence to perform the activity sensitive to the target and adequate to the problem. Or, and, it could be both, one has an exercise and enduring competence to reflect, compare, evaluate possible ways of performing the activity and learn something about the target, in part on that basis, that's past dependence here, and adequate to the problem. Okay, that's a mouthful, and I'm sorry. But think about Angie, right? About Lewis. Okay, so she has some understanding of the target, which is antivirus prevalence in deer mice. For the problem, which is like whether diversity dilutes transmission or amplifies transmission. And her activity is by theoretical modeling. If an LCC is competent in modeling population, right? And I'll say more about the exercise and enduring, just bracket that for now. She's competent in actually modeling deer mice population. She is, there's no question about that in my mind, in a way that is sensitive to the target, because modeling like the population, but about the color of their tail, for example, would not help us, right? So it needs to be sensitive to the target and also adequate to the problem. And then she reflects, right? She reflects on the particular models that she's using. She compares the possible models that she's using, and she evaluates those models in comparison to the problem. So that's going back to when she says, we don't need age structure actually in the model, just ditch that. But we're going to add some stochastic aspect to carrying capacity. Okay. So that's what it is. So if some people followed me a little bit, then you notice that I went from 3 to 2. So the evaluation got swallowed into the second thing. That's okay. All of this is basically meta level, right? So there are typically two ways in which scientists generate understanding. Either they engage in understanding conducive activities, or they reflect on the possible ways to engage into that activity. Okay. I'm going to say more about each of those things. Why do we have a competence? We have a competence because it's largely the ability-based thing. What do we mean by a competence? We take Soazig's analysis, and I am not an epistemologist, so if you want to take issue with that, that's fine. But it is a disposition to do something well, and you need to be in the right condition. So here I'm putting all the things that prevent from the stuff you talked about here. In the right constitution, in the right condition for skillful and successful performance. Just because something randomly interfered with you doesn't mean that you don't have the competence. They must be exercised and enduring. Why is that? I'm telling you, I did something wrong. They're after me. I will never make it back to the US. Exercise and enduring. This is because we don't think that a disposition is enough. You need to have an actual doing of the stuff to have understanding. I have worries about disposition not being actualized and counting as an actual achievement. And it needs to be enduring because my understanding of how to, of quantum theory, for example, has really highly diminished in the last 20 years. I haven't manipulated quantum stuff for 20 years, probably, and if you ask me right now to deal with a Schrödinger equation and find the eigenvector, I can't do it. I mean, I'm pretty confident I can't do it. There was a time I could, not now. So enduring means that competence needs to be actual, double actual. So it's not enough to have it done once. It's actually something that you can do right now. The sensitivity part is actually a response to an anonymous reviewer, which I am absolutely certain is Karim, simply because the style, and you'll get, you understand. So, and that also answers to some of Jake's worries from yesterday. What if someone performs the activity and following this understand that the equation is not a pickle? See, that's Karim, right? Only Karim goes with pickle. Anyway, so that's how it becomes, it needs to be sensitive to K. Right, sorry, sensitive to the target. So if you're not responsive to the actual target, if you're just randomly discovering things that have nothing to do with either the target or the problem you're trying to solve, then it's not going to be relevant, and that diminishes the realm of things that you can do that are actually conducive of understanding. So it's to restrict the space of abilities and what the abilities give you. Okay, so sensitive to T and adequate to K, meaning that they need to help you solve the problem. Otherwise, it doesn't work for that kind of understanding. Reflective understanding, so this meta-level understanding, scientists do that all the time. They really do, and that was in many ways the first intuition behind this whole project of mine over the last 10 years. They reflect on the ways in which they approach their activities. They compare particular models or particular theories or particular practices, and they evaluate them all the time. And so I think it's absolutely crucial to give room for this, but not give room only to this, because just engaging in one activity also is conducive of understanding. So they reflect on, they compare, they evaluate possible ways of performing the activity, let's say theoretical modeling in ecology, and they learn something about T, about the target on that basis in a way that is adequate to the problem, that helps solve the problem. So NG compares various models and evaluate the possible ways to model the deer mice population and the transmission, and she learns something about transmission as she goes, or diversity, dilution, amplification relationship as she goes, on the basis of her modeling, not randomly, right? Because if you learn stuff randomly, that doesn't work. That's not, then the activity is not the one that is conducive of the understanding. And adequate to K, because again, if you learn that your equation is not a pickle, that's not going to work out, right? This is not the kind of understanding that we are after. You actually learn something about the possible underlying mechanisms behind the relationship between diversity and disease transmission. Okay, so that's the meta level of understanding. It has the same structure in terms of exercise and enduring competence, so I don't need to repeat myself on this. Some things to note, it requires some knowledge. Ouch. I always said that there was no knowledge in understanding. It turns out I think there is, but not necessarily of the phenomena. It could be knowledge of modal relationships, like Colin Rice wants it to be. It could be knowledge of relationships between structures, like Ottavio just talked about. It could be knowledge of all kinds of things. But I do think it's interesting, and we talk more about this in the book, is that because we have this element of knowledge, that might be actually helping, making sense of why some people think understanding is factive and some people think it's not. And it could be that there is a little piece of past of knowledge there that makes some aspect of understanding factive, but not others. Past dependence, as I mentioned, it has to be based on you performing and evaluating and all of this activity. If you just, if an angel comes visit you and say, the deer mice cuddle together and that's why they get all sick, that doesn't count as the kind of understanding, scientific understanding that is generated by this particular activity that you are engaging with in your lab. I don't think that Angie was ever visited by an angel, but I could ask her. Her name is Angela, after all, right? Okay. All right, done with the complicated brain-breaking stuff. Let's talk about wolves. Because why not, right? They're cool. Okay, so I'm going to talk about wolf management a little bit and try to show you how the view applies to this particular case. I could have chosen multiple different cases, including cases which are very similar to what Ottavio just talked about. In my case, it's not direct. My case is Robert May, discovery of deterministic chaos. That's my favorite thing. I think it's really cool, and it's similar ideas. Take an equation, see what it can do, and oh my God, it does something. Could that possibly be the case? And oh, it is. Deterministic chaos. Cool. I really like that story. That was a very quick story. There's more to it, but I took wolf management because I think what's interesting here is that it's a clear case of scientific understanding. I think it's a clear case. It's also a clear case in which no explanatory work is done, which I think is interesting, and it applies nice. And we have very nice examples of how the scientists do the stuff we say they do. So that's very nice of them to provide us with that kind of stuff. Okay, so wolves. The problem we're trying to solve in this case for wolf management is to generate abundance data. How many wolves do we have on the mountain? That's the question. There is a fact of the matter about how many wolves live in the mountain at a certain time, right? This is not something that's uncertain or unpredictable or intractable or whatever. No, there's a fact of the matter. There's a certain number. Maybe it's 1,066 wolves on the mountain. Okay. The problem is that we don't know how to count them. We can't count them very easily. We need to count them. Why? What is the problem? We need to count them because we need to know how many we can kill. Barf. Because people like to kill wolves. And the question, especially in a place like Montana, Fish, Wildlife, and Park is going to ask their ecologists, the state ecologists, give us abundance data. That way we can set harvest quota. That's how you call killing wolves, is a harvest. Vocabulary matters. So how many we can harvest? And the constraint is that we don't have that much time. We don't have that much staff. We don't have that much budget. And the wolves, how dare they? They're pretty elusive and they really don't want to be seen. So it's not like we can line them up, it's like ask them to go through. It's like 1, 2, we can't count them. There is no comprehensive count that's possible. Ideally, you would go with capture, recapture. That's the kind of the most accurate way to count. It's extremely expensive and time consuming. So it's not really a feasible thing to do. Plus, it's very intrusive. You have to dot the wolf, and then the wolf falls and then it's asleep, and then you take the wolf and you check the color and the genetic makeup and I don't know what, and then you bring them back, and then there's always that worry, like you put the wolf, it's like sleepy in the middle of the woods, and you let them, let the wolf there, they might have lost their pack. Anyways, it's very complicated. So what are the other options? How could we know how many wolves live on the mountain? Well, there are tons of different ways. You can look at, you can do acoustic surveys of wolf howls. So you can listen to them and see how many, and try to model how many of them there must be, given how many types of howls you've heard. We know that packs come with different languages, or actually dialects, and they recognize themselves from pack to pack, so we can estimate, depending on the howls, how many packs we have. We have an idea of on average how many wolves are in a pack and those kinds of things. Genetic capture, jury capture, you just capture not the wolf but their poop. It's way easier to capture poop than it is to capture a wolf. So you took fecal samples and you look at the genetic makeup in there, and you try to, again, using models, abundance models, you try to estimate wolf abundance. Hunter surveys. So hunters are all over the mountain, right? They don't like to see wolves unless they want to kill wolves. But most hunters are not trophy hunters. Most hunters in Montana, is that an empirical claim I'm making that I'm not sure about? I'm not sure about that empirical claim. A good proportion of hunters on the mountain in Montana do not hunt for trophies, but hunt for food. And so they kill deer and elk. They spend a lot of time in the woods trying to find deer and elk. And so from time to time, they see wolves, right? And they have a survey, there's a QR code, and they can go on there. So I saw a wolf that day, blah, 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 blah. And then you build, again, some models on the basis of those surveys, and you try to estimate the abundance of wolves. Or you can do camera captures, aerial surveys. Aerial surveys are cool, are really easy in Yellowstone. They're really not when it's too woody, like around Glacier. You can't see anything. In Yellowstone, it's easier to see them because there's just not as much vegetation where they hang out, which is in the Lamar Valley. Aerial surveys, snow track surveys, so there are all kinds of things. Every time you have, in addition to on places where usually wolves turn out to pee on his cameras more often than not. Most of his footing is like there's a wolf coming, sniffing the camera, and shh. And then, of course, if one does it, everybody does it, right? So I don't know, those cameras must be pretty rusted. But I didn't ask those questions. I keep those questions for myself. But so Jeremy goes out there, right? He skis, he treks, and then he puts those cameras out there. I think Jeremy generates some understanding on how to generate data and understanding of wolf abundance when he, competently engages in the activity of putting cameras out there and then bringing the cameras back and then reading those cameras and then using the models on the basis of the camera sightings to estimate wolf abundance. It is sensitive to wolf abundance. For example, it would be silly to put your camera on what you know is a rendezvous site where the packs tend to gather, because then you would overestimate because the population, because you would see a lot of wolves. Oh my God, there are so many of them. Well, yeah, you just took them in their house. So it's like, people in the street versus people in a house. So there are more people in a house than on a random time in the street. Okay, so it is sensitive to the target. It's also adequate to conservation purposes. It's much cheaper than capture, and it is a well-known thing that they do. They have the computers to do the modeling and all those kinds of things. Here I want to say that understanding can be minimal. So I'm saying that the guy, the wolf researcher who is just going out there and predicting abundance has understanding of abundance and understanding of how to generate data. There's no explanation involved. It's just about how many there are, and it is pretty minimal. It has an exercise and engineering competence, it's sensitive to the target, it's problem dependent, and of course, as I just explained, there are multiple ways in which you could do that, multiple solutions to that problem. So if Jeremy does camera stuff, camera traps. I don't know what they call camera traps, so they don't trap anything. I mean, sightings, I guess. But anyway, he has camera traps, but other wolf researchers do other things. There's also a reflective understanding on how to generate wolf abundance data. Remember, this is about reflecting on comparing and evaluating. There is, in 2014, Arslan and colleague actually make a comparison between the various ways in which you can estimate wolf abundance between hunter service, radiotelemetry, and genetic sampling at rendezvous sites. And they get results. So they had like a kind of, oh, sorry, I thought it was like a 5 minutes. No problem. But then it was supposed to come from Maria, and I was like, oh my God, this is really weird. There was actually a joint project, a very serious project to try to estimate wolf abundance, collaboration between the Feds and the Nez Perce tribes. And so Arslan shows that actually hunter surveys surprisingly provided the closest estimate to what we think is a very good quality estimate. Okay, and also there is evaluation. So Creel, for example, went after the modeling of Fish, Wildlife, and Park in Idaho, saying that the way they were using their models was totally insane. He doesn't say insane, but totally wrong. Why? Because, so this is data that's about precisely camera traps put at rendezvous sites. And Creel says, you put them at rendezvous sites. Are you out of your mind? The models assume, one of the assumptions of the model is that wolf sightings will be independent of time and space. Clearly, if you put the camera on rendezvous sites, it is not independent of time and space. So the way you gather data is in direct conflict with the assumptions of the model, which means the model is not well used. And it's likely to be an overestimate of the population, which, of course, for hunters, that's not a big deal because they get to harvest more. For people like me who are non-consumptive users, that's what we call the wolf watchers. So I think it's very funny that the default is consuming, and then the watchers are the non-consumptive users. So as a non-consumptive user of wolves, whatever that means, I hate that term so much. It's like there is harvest, consumptive user. I don't consume wolves. Nobody eats them anyway. They kill them for fun or hate or whatever. So anyway, so for the non-consumptive users, of course, the fact that we are possibly overestimating the wolf population is a real problem, right? Because now I'm going to be able to see fewer wolves, and it's hard enough to see wolves. I'm going to be able to see fewer wolves because you kill too many of them. One of the main reasons the state doesn't want to kill them all is that then they become endangered. And you know what happens? Thank you. When they become endangered, the feds are coming in. And Montana doesn't want the feds to come in. We don't want the federal government to mess with us. So they really want it to be state level, which means that they need to have it at the level where they don't become endangered again. Okay. So, but back here, Creel is a clear example of how scientists themselves evaluate very seriously the kind of modeling practices, data gathering practices, and how to mix those for abundance, to estimate wolf abundance. Okay, so this is it, the conclusion. So the problem is that extant views of understanding are not appropriately comprehensive. They're pretty good at talking about representations of phenomena, even if I do think that they're not perfect there, but I think that they have something interesting to say. But they don't fit theoretical understanding. They don't fit practical understanding. They don't fit all the kinds of problems and activities that scientists deal with all the time. I think it is important to specify what we're talking about when we talk about scientific understanding. It is relative to a target, it is relative to a problem, it is relative to particular activities. And it's also, and then if we have that, and we can say that understanding is generated when scientists engage in an activity which is, solving their problem, or they reflect, compare, and evaluate the possible approaches to that problem or the possible problem solutions. And I think that the advantages of the PNP view is that it's comprehensive and unifying, it's multi-gradable, understand there's a typo here, I'm sorry, and it makes understanding not elusive. And I think that's actually very important. That was also one of the motivations. I didn't talk about this, but I really don't like the fact that under the common view, understanding is so rare. The vast majority of scientific practice doesn't seem to be conducive of understanding at all. And that really bothers me, including because of the vast idealization in so many scientific models. And I didn't argue for this now, but just I'm going to go with trust me system. It solves extent problem, including the value of robustness analysis, theoretical models in ecology, and which is basically your answer, and the relationship between unification and explanation. And here you go. So if you have questions, that would be great. But if you want to count how many wolves you can spot, this is a shot I took in Yellowstone last time I went. Yeah, there's an entire pack there. And I don't have the recording, but they were all howling too. They were just on the other side of the mountain there. Anyways, there are lots of them. And we'll see, I'll give, I don't know, some kind of reward to whoever guesses.
Thanks, this is great. And I'd like to push you a little bit on the reflective understanding.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't clear to me why you really need the knowledge, even if it's not about the phenomena. Because I took it that the understanding that you're talking about in those contexts is where we're now reflecting about practice.
Right.
And why is it that things work the way. Presumably you may have that understanding even if you don't have the knowledge.
So would you agree that if I compare two models, for example, and I see that they have a similar structure, I'm just making this up, right? Mm-hmm. But they have a similar structure, let's say a mathematical structure, whatever. That statement, those two models have a similar structure in that kind of way, I think that's a piece of knowledge because there's some truth there about that particular structure. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, no, it might be the case, right? The question is that required for you to understand, right?
So what would it mean to understand a relationship between two models, for example, if it's not in terms of truth, of true relationship?
Well, look, you may understand, for example, I understand relations about things that are fictional, right? I understand, for example, that Watson really loved clones, but this is a Victorian novel, so that never shows up, right? Now, these are fictional objects, right? They don't exist, and
Can we have truth about fictional objects? I don't know about that. I mean, I have
no, we can, right? We can say true things about it, but there is a sense in which these are all made up things, right? And,
yeah, but I still make like true or false statements about Harry Potter, right?
Can. The question is if whether that's required.
Yeah.
For the understanding.
I feel like yes.
Because if it is, then I don't see why it's something only with a reflective understanding that comes out.
Say that again?
I don't see, if you think that that's required,
Yeah.
that should also happen in the lower level understanding, not only the reflective.
No, that I don't think so. So at the lower level, I think if you just engage in your activity and you help solving the problems, whether you have truth or not there, it doesn't matter. You can help solve a problem without truthful things. There are plenty of useful things that are not truthful.
Yeah, but then if that goes through, I don't see why it doesn't upstairs.
Okay, I'll think about that. Thanks, that's useful. I appreciate that.
So, Jake?
Yeah, thanks for the talk. My question is just, so, you define understanding relative to problems, right?
Yeah.
So I guess my question is there no context-independent sense of understanding on this view? Because it seems like, if I understand why the house burned down and I'm fully apprised of all the relevant features and I, grasp it and do all the stuff I need to do with it, and then I'm put into another context and I still maintain that knowledge, right? I mean, it seems like I understand why, but, maybe the problem space has shifted, right? And so it seems like since you're defining it relative to a problem, it seems maybe too context sensitive at least some cases.
So that brings us back to, in some ways, to Bob and Alex, I think, from Tanya. So I don't think that let's forget about the AI part. Let's imagine it's actually a psychologist, so that we don't have to deal with the AI possibility. But so there is transfer of understanding, right? But I think that you would have to apply it to the new house. And so to ask you a new question, which is, why did that house burn down? Oh, wait, I can transfer some stuff, and it could be that it's because of a faulty wire, right? Or a nasty young boy, I don't know.
Can I understand just without any problem in mind? I mean, just intuitively, it seems like it's not like, it just seems to be the case.
So it's an account of scientific understanding.
Oh, scientific, okay, sorry, yeah.
And
well, that makes more sense.
so I'm not sure I want to say that's an account of understanding in general. It's certainly not a fundamental account of understanding.
Okay.
We rely on the notion of skill, right? There's like skillful performance. So there's skill there. So whatever the epistemologists decide what skills are, that's going to be great. But we don't give an analysis of skill, for example. So it's not a fundamental view of understanding. It's certainly, I think it does apply to philosophical understanding, so historical understanding, and some other things. But I haven't written about that. I do think it applies, but that's my little thing in the back of my head. But for now, I'm just saying this is an account of scientific understanding. And what I want to say is that the best way to understand scientific understanding is to see that it is related to a research question, right? You generate understanding relative to a research question, not in the wild.
Thanks. Alan?
Yeah, thanks. The example of the data gatherer contributing.
Yeah, Jeremy,
right?
Jeremy's awesome.
Didn't want to be overly familiar with someone. That got me thinking about.
I should put a picture of Jeremy up there.
It's like one thing I think probably there's broad agreement that whenever there's understanding, there's like an object of understanding, maybe the target, your way of doing things. And I was also wondering whether there was broad agreement, or whether this might be up for grabs, whether there's always a subject of understanding, someone or something who understands. So, when Jeremy gathers the data, I feel like I can kind of distinguish between the claim, I think we can distinguish between the claim, a bit more confident about that Jeremy, in so doing, comes to understand maybe better how many wolves there are, versus he contributes to understanding how many wolves there are in a way. That second claim is sort of neutral as to whether he understands any better. And I can sort of imagine, like, in a scientific research context, that there might be a lot of people who are contributing to understanding, but they don't, it would be sort of awkward to describe the situation as them gaining understanding, even though they are creating or causing or generating understanding, but it's sort of not theirs, or they're not the subject of it. So I was sort of wondering, one possibility is that, okay, maybe scientific understanding, maybe by contrast to some of the other species of understanding that get studied in philosophy, is subjectless. That would be one interesting feature of it that would sort of explain this generation or contribution structure without the claim that, I guess the claim is not a little implausible, it's just by gathering this data he understood things better. It's like, he didn't really, but it sounded plausible to me that he sort of contributed understanding, or generated understanding, or created understanding. Another possibility is the understander, the subject of understanding isn't the individual, but it's the group. We often talk, I think the philosophers of science will often say, we understand. This model helps us understand. So maybe approaching it as a group achievement would, that helps me understand a little bit better some of the things in this picture. It might be suitable to scientific understanding in a way that would not sort of be the way to think about other sorts of understanding, which really are like individual things that individuals have, relations that individuals bear to phenomena, whereas scientific understanding might not be a relation that individuals bear to phenomena, and that might explain some of its curious features.
Thanks. I don't think I want to take a stand on that. There's definitely a question of individual versus group, right? It is most likely most scientific practice is within a team, right? It's in a lab, and there are more than one, right? Angie has plenty of people in her lab, grad students, undergrad students, and Jeremy is part of the Wolf Project, the Yellowstone Wolf Project. And the Yellowstone Wolf Project obviously, has all kinds of ducksmiths and blah, 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 and blah, 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 and ecologists and him, who still needs to get his PhD. And, you should all go and encourage Jeremy to get his PhD because he's smart enough to get one. Anyway, so Jeremy gains understanding. I think his team gains understanding. And then by testimony, the scientific community, maybe ecologists, because all of this is about epistemic communities, right? And so within that epistemic community of wolf ecologists, let's keep it to that, gain understanding, at least in my view. I think it's going to be organic, the way in which it's going to go from the individual to the group level to the more community level. And then I gain understanding, and I'm none of that, right? Because Jeremy explains to me what's going on, and again, probably some kind of, again, I'm not an epistemologist, probably some kind of testimony. Is that what happens? I read his stuff, he talks to me. So I don't know about the last piece, but definitely in terms of scientific understanding within communities, there is like some kind of ecological communities of scientists. There's a group, there's a lab level, there's an individual level, and I think that the understanding is contributing at all levels in some kind of way. But we don't take a stance on that. Other people work on the relationship between individual and social. So Colin Rice and Karim Khalifa are working on social epistemology. I am not a social epistemologist, so I don't have a great answer to this, but I think there are some answers on how that, and our account doesn't certainly require that this is anything like in someone's mind, right? Yeah. I haven't talked about any phenomenology on purpose. So it doesn't need to be tied to one individual.
Yeah, interesting. Thanks. Thank you for the talk. So early you were talking about how you want to characterize understanding in terms of problems, and then giving some requirements in terms of success, and maybe the possibility of, success will involve the possibility of repeating that same success. And I guess I was wondering, so for example, like many scientific problems seem to be dependent on a research program, right? So the problems that you're going to find in some scientific, theory are going to be related to the way in which you are approaching that program. So say, before chemistry, you're not going to be able to ask about, molecules and, like receptors and where the molecules bind to the receptors and so on. Like you don't have the language to do that, right? So, so I want to understand how, in your view, you treat theory change, for example, and whether, you take those as a kind of meta problem so that the same criteria will apply in those cases. Do you see what I mean? So
I'm
for
not
example,
sure. Say that again.
So for example, like, say you are thinking about another example, right? Say you're thinking about stars in the Newtonian theory, and then you're thinking about stars in the relativistic theory, right? Okay. So when you're thinking about stars in the relativistic theory, then you're going to find new problems that have to do with gravitational pull and so on that you didn't have in the Newtonian theory. So it seems that in order for your account to be encompassing enough, it should be able to tell you, to give you a notion of understanding that allows for theory change and allows you to characterize how you can, how you can change, go from one set of problems to another. So I was wondering how you understand that. Like, is the problem of going from one set of problems to another problem, such that your measures will apply to that, and maybe say a little bit more about that, if you have thought about it.
Yeah, So I mean, there are two possible there are two possible ways to approach the question. Thank you very much. So one is the question of the epistemic value of false theories, right? So Newtonian caloric theory, whatever your favorite is, right? So I do think they provide understanding, even if they've proven to be false. I think it would be crazy to say that Newton theory doesn't provide understanding. I think it would be crazy to say that the caloric theory of combustion doesn't provide understanding. But anyway, so I have that strong intuition. So how do we deal with this? And in fact, we all learned Newton theory. I think we all learned Newton theory in high school. Apparently not in the US, no. Not everybody takes physics in high school. I've discovered that. Like, this is not a thing. You don't have to take physics in high school. It's really weird. Anyway, my kids will take physics. It's been decided. So yeah, how does Newton theory provide understanding? Well, because it solves some problems, right? And you don't gain the Newtonian kind of understanding of gravity until you have a minimum competence to actually engage with that theory, which is what we did when we solve all the little stupid problems about the inclined plane and the thing that just jumped into the air and came back and all of those trajectories and all of this, right? So and then you gain understanding. And so if 20 years later you cannot engage with Newton theory in the same way, your understanding is less. It's not zero, but it's less, right? Your competence has decreased, and so I think that's consistent. If I want to be, I wish, Haizok-Chang, right? Haizok-Chang, and I want to understand exactly how, what kind of understanding the caloric theory of combustion provided, I will need to do some work, right? I will need to do what Haizok has done, is to check out the actual scientific papers, or Maxwell, or Oersted, right? You have to read those papers and try to start engaging with that theory to really getting a sense of what this theory does. Whether it has been proven to be false, I don't think matters as much as how much you engage with it. And it's common degrees, right? You can have a very superficial understanding of the caloric theory. You can have a deep understanding of it. And in terms of theory change, yeah, most of the time, well, you're going to, it's not necessary that you change the problem, you definitely change the problem solution, right? So either you change the problem, if you don't change the problem, you change the problem solution. So it's another problem solution for the same problem, or it might be that it becomes a new problem altogether. It might be that the new problem solution brings new problems. That make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
So, Stephen?
Thanks very much, Soazig. So, I'm wondering what's distinctively modal about the view. So, your earlier view was clearly distinctively modal, and now the idea of problems is entered, and I wonder if it's, I wonder how the problems and possibilities are connected. So suppose trying to understand how to prepare a certain sample in a lab, and I don't know, maybe just by luck I come across the right way to prepare a certain sample. That's one way to do it, but now I think I do maybe understand how to prepare the sample and I can pass on to others. There's a way in which, well, no, here's how a modal element would come in, or it's not luck, it's just the first try I get it right. The way the modal element might enter is that I don't really understand how to prepare the sample unless I've thought about 4 or 5 different ways to prepare the sample, kind of trial and error them, and then come to think that just realize that this was the effective way. So that might bring a modal element in, but it's not really essential to solve the problem, because I could just pass on the right way to the disciples in my lab about how to prepare the sample, where they have no idea of the modal space and different possibilities that I went through. So I guess I'm wondering what's distinctively modal about it, because the problem solving seems to have become very important and maybe just doing all the work, I guess.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so as Ari would say, well, once I have a solution, what's up with that?
Right.
Like, so what do you do once I have a solution? I've got my understanding. What's about your possibilities? They're totally unnecessary.
Okay.
So that's Ari's version of the question. Yes. So yes, you have on this view, you have understanding, you have some level of understanding once you have one solution for your problem.
Yeah.
The modalities or the possibilities come, and it could be that this is it. It could be like for a simple problem like this, there is a simple solution and that's it, and we don't need to spend more time on it.
Yeah.
And I think I'm fine with that. What I'm saying is that in a lot of cases, there is not a simple solution to a simple problem, but instead we have complicated problems that come with multiple possible solutions. And that's where, at that point, I want to believe that having, if you have not only one but two possible problem solutions, you are better equipped. And if you start comparing them and see how they relate with one another and evaluate them, then you're even better equipped. But there is a very minimum sense of understanding here, which has nothing to do with modality, which is like I had a problem, I solved it. I don't think it's the vast majority of problems or the interesting problems, I don't know, in science. That makes sense?
Merci, c'était super.
Yeah, I really loved it. I know that you talked about rules that I really like the example, but I think that, there's another historical example that I think would be really cool to maybe add to basically the book. So in Les étapes de la philosophie mathématique, Leo Bushwick has a really wonderful chapter on the arithmetization of analysis, where he talks about how Cauchy, Bolzano, and particularly Weierstrass really struggled to come up with a clear conception of limit, because all the previous understandings, which were based on geometrical intuitions, were basically not good for basically doing rigorous calculus. And one of the things that Bushwick basically points out is that Weierstrass basically struggled with basically developing a rigorous notion of limit. He explored different possibilities, and he eventually came out with basically a notion of limit that is based on numbers. And but he did basically have to try different basically options to ultimately find out something that was rigorous enough to basically provide solid foundations for the calculus. And one of the things that also Bushwick basically points out is that when Weierstrass basically did that, this made him realize that the ways in which people understood other notions that were related to basically limit, which were basically continuity and derivability, were also basically not really in line, which ultimately led Weierstrass to develop basically, to construct actually a function which is continuous everywhere, but it's derivable basically nowhere. And when he presented that, mathematicians basically just freaked out. Because, for them, derivability was tied to basically continuity. And when Weierstrass basically showed that that was not the case, people were just like...
I remember someone talking to me about that function. I forget when, it was a long time ago, but in some kind of math class we looked at it. It's a really cool function.
Yeah, it's a really cool function.
Thanks, that's fantastic. I will have to take the reference if you don't mind. I would love to have that.
Yep.
I don't want to touch too much of the mathematics stuff because I worry about philosophers of math going after me. I'm already talking to philosophers of science, and sometimes I'm trying to talk to epistemologists, and I try to avoid those guys because I know that they know stuff that I don't know. But so if I go into the philosophy of math now, I'm opening a big can of worms. And the beautiful worms, don't get me wrong, but they might be wormy though. But that's cool. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Your account reminded me a lot of Larry Loudon's view of science as problem solving. And if you put together Larry's account and your account, we would have a wonderful view of science as an attempt to find understanding of the world. So I was wondering if you have ever explored Loudon's
I haven't.
view of
I love Loudon's
science.
work. I mean,
Yeah.
absolutely. I always think that he's extremely clear and has some of the best articles on every wicked problem in philosophy of science. It's like, oh, this is it. And
Very congenial to your present.
well, I'm happy to, if you can point in a specific direction, I would love to.
Science and its problems.
Right. Sounds good. Yeah, thank you. I mean, there's a long tradition of people who say that science is problem solving, right? It's not like a revolutionary claim, which is great because I don't want to make revolutionary claims, because if you do that, you don't get published. So, but so there is a long tradition. I don't think that anybody put it this way, but there is a long tradition of thinking about. It's not like out of the blue, absolutely. But thank you. That's really, it's good. It might not be on our radar, so that's really useful. Thank you, Andres.
Anybody else? If not, I want to ask, I don't know whether this is a version of Moises' question or it's a misinterpretation of his, but I was wondering about nested problems, because his question was pressuring on whether this is a meta problem, and so when we are thinking about theory change, we often think ourselves changing to a different paradigm, or however you want to call it. But what about if you are trying to see whether some of the old problems relate to the new ones? So it seems.
But that's your problem right there.
Yes, but then you have nested problems. So
Right.
you have nested problem solving strategies incorporated to each of the views, right? Or the paradigm, or however you want to call it. And whether that changed anything, because all the examples that you were giving were just one type of problems guiding the quest, right? And so this one is a mixture of.
So, I mean, I might misunderstand what you're saying, but it seems to me so, I'm taking an example that I'm familiar with, right? So, Robert May, theoretical physicist, converted ecologist, look at the logistic growth equation, and he's interested in the mathematical properties of this beast, right? And to study the mathematical properties of the beast, of the logistic growth equation, he takes a bunch of models that are used by entomologists, so insect people. Not insect people, insect population scientists. Maybe they're also insect people. So those entomologists ask questions about insect population for very specific purposes, which is typically, how to get rid of insects for agriculture. But May is not incorporating that problem into his work. He doesn't care about insects in agriculture. He's not growing anything. He's not helping the agriculture people. He's just like a guy in Princeton doing some mathematical work. So he takes those problems, he takes those equations, but doesn't take to study them, the theoretical structure, but doesn't import the problems they were built for. He's got a new set of problems for those equations, which is, what do they do when I increase the intrinsic growth rate, and can they do crazy things? Turns out they do crazy things. So I guess if the question is, if I look at two different theories or set of models or family of models or ways to approach scientific thingies, whatever you want to call them, and I want to see how they relate with one another, then this is a new problem, and you don't need to import all the problems that those two research programs had to deal with. Does that make any sense, or am I off?
No, I think it makes sense. So, yeah.
Okay. A finger.
It's just a quick follow-up. It's just, I guess one worry here is that the kind of problem that you presented is, about wealth abundance, seems very much related to empirics and observation, statistics, and so on. And then I guess one of the worries here that maybe Maria and I share is that there are some problems in science which are by no means rare problems that have to do with translation between theories and embeddings of models and so on. It's not so much that you're looking at a problem and then you see that maybe you may be able to use another model to tackle the same problem, but rather that you have to do, so say for example, when the discussion of the equivalence between matrix mechanics and wave mechanics, right? So that's a problem of showing that you have an equivalence between two ways of tackling an issue, right?
Yeah.
Or the problem of figuring out whether Hilbert space is like the right space to do quantum mechanics, right?
Right.
So, I'm pretty sure that there's a way of accommodating this kind of view to your view, these kinds of problems. But I guess what we were looking for was a more detailed explanation of how you might explain success and other.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, so that's the kind of theoretical work, right, that I talked about. So reaxiomatization, reformulation, Lagrangian mechanics, which doesn't add any explanation, right? Those kinds of reformulation, reaxiomatization, or looking into the mathematical structure of particular formalism or equations or theories of or models. Absolutely, this applies. The target is different. The target is now theory. You're not trying to understand necessarily the phenomena. You're trying to understand how the theory is working, or those theories are working. The activity is mathematical investigation or whatever, logical investigation, but it could be a mathematical investigation of how two theories relate to one another, right? How is one reducing to another? Is this equation, can I make it reduce to this one? Or is it not possible? And so it's engaging in those mathematical investigations, and then it could be also reflecting on, comparing, and evaluating the various ways in which you can approach formal questions about theories and models. So the same thing applies. It's just the type of problem is very different, and the target is probably different, because I tend to think in those kinds of things, exactly what Robert May does. He doesn't increase our understanding of phenomena. He just said that it's possible for difference equations to behave as if it was chaotic or really stochastic-looking behavior, right? So it's possible for those perfectly deterministic models to behave in a way that looks stochastic. So he's not telling you that there are populations in the world that behave like this. He's just saying, hey, it's possible that determinism ends up with chaotic stuff. It's a total mathematical property of those models. We learn something about those models. Now, later on, he goes and talks to people in the UK who are studying insects, say, hey, it could be possible that your insects are actually following a deterministic, they look stochastic, but it could be that they are actually governed by the density-dependent linear equations, the density-dependent difference equations, because their intrinsic growth rate is so high that it could actually end up in being chaotic. So I do think that absolutely one important goal of this is precisely to incorporate and account for those kinds of absolutely, out of touch with reality kind of investigations. Right? Chris Fuchs, he created this toy model for quantum correlation. It's a ridiculous model, but it recreates the quantum correlation. It was a revolution. How does that not produce understanding? It does, right? Does it tell us something about the phenomena? Is it an explanation? No. It has nothing to do with explanation or causal relations. It's just, hey, look, I've got this baby model here, and it reproduces quantum correlation. Haha, got you. And everybody goes nuts, right? I think it was 2008. Don't quote me on that. I think it was 2008.
Oh, you are on record, right? So. But thank you, everybody. Thank you so